This conference will now be recorded.
And Forrest, is it okay if I take a copy of that program? And because we'll post it up on the town's website too, with the minutes from this. Okay. See if it'll let me do it while it's running. It will. Perfect. All right. If everybody else has theirs on and they're quiet, not that close. But if everybody turns theirs off, then you kind of got to be close because it will pick up if you just kind of walk around the room. Because I'm a wanderer too, and I'll take this one, I'll stick it right over here too, so it kind of helps you out.
How you doing? Really good, man. How are you? Good. Right on. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Good. Tried to lock the door.
He said he saw you coming. He's like, "Should be right." Nothing on it. Just have to be a part of that thing every once in a while. When I join.
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm Forrest.
I'm Mark.
Nice to meet you. Forrest, Jerry. Nice to meet you. Pleasure to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
I'm Jennifer.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Oh, well,
You work at Willie's? I do. That's some great stuff. Well, thank you. I do enjoy selling.
Yeah.
The Canadian is terrific. Oh, thank you. It's a great price point, better than Pendleton, I think. So, could we somehow get that
poster
quote
Yeah,
online?
get that in writing.
It's funny, that's kind of the whole goal of the whole thing was to compete and beat that kind of price point competition. So, thank you.
Well, that's what I heard, that there was all, that you kept getting the question, where's the Canadian?
Well, mainly at the rodeos.
Right.
Yeah. Before that kind of started back in the day, it was like, we got this great bourbon and you want Canadian whiskey? It's like, we should make Canadian whiskey.
Yeah.
So we released it.
No, that's my go-to Canadian.
You tried the Devil's Brigade yet?
I've tried it.
So there's
Yeah.
some Canadian in that, of course.
Right. Yeah. That's good. Everything's good there.
Well, good. Just wait till the
how are you?
new tasting room's done. Hopefully that'll be here July-ish.
Awesome.
Hey, Corey.
Looks like to see. I know.
Sir? Shazam.
I've got some copies of the presentation. I've got some business cards there too.
Are we gonna need coffee for this?
Coffee?
Yes.
I hope I'm exciting enough. This is land use planning. This is exciting.
Yes, it is.
Anybody want a business card, of course?
I would.
Is it on? Oh, it's right.
Yeah, my contact information's on there too, but business card is.
Okay.
I put my business card right there. That is my CD collection.
Rolodex. Are we expecting many more people?
Not that I know, I get a whole lot of response, so maybe.
Okay.
Maybe they'll, I got a response from pretty much everybody you see here.
Okay.
There might be one or two, one other that said it couldn't, just try to dial in.
Okay. Well, I think we're on line, so.
I reached out to, or we reached out to all the zoning board people and stuff.
Okay.
They should be aware.
All right. Well, I can go ahead and dive in, and if people come, we can circle back and copy the thing you wanted me to go over. So I guess just some ground rules information. If you do speak, turn on your microphones just with the power button. So if you turn that on, then it'll pick up online, and anyone that is dialed in can hear it that way. Otherwise, they won't be able to hear us. And I think it is being recorded, so watch what you say, and it should be available. So my name is Forrest Mandeville. I'm out of Columbus. Was born and raised there. Fourth generation, raising the fifth generation. So that's, I'm not a big town type of guy. I'm not one of, you don't have to worry about me being a planner that pulled out of Los Angeles or something, that coming in here and telling you what to do. My father-in-law grew up over in Twin Bridges, so we still have some family over there. So we're through Ennis every, at least once a year or so, usually, to head over to that side of the county and visit family. Kind of my style is, if you do have any questions, just raise your hand or yell at me, and we can stop and spend some time on that issue, on that question. The only bad question is a question you don't ask, because I can't answer your question if you don't ask it. I did kind of set up a pretty all-encompassing presentation here. It does really get into some details. So if you want to get more into details or less into details, that's fine. I don't mind nerding out about land use policy and planning. It's definitely one of those things that's bizarrely fun for me. I've been doing planning for about 15, 16 years now. Just kind of stumbled into it. It wasn't something that I went to school for or anything like that. My degree is political science. It's just the planning office happened to be what was hiring at the time I was looking for work. But it did kind of fit me pretty well, and I've been doing it for a while. So are there any questions that anyone has before we really dive into this? Okay. Everyone's on the planning board, right? Is that what I understand? Okay. Newly constituted? Not all of you? Okay.
Are we gonna do an
Why don't we
introduction?
why don't we do it, kind of some introduction, and we'll just run around the room and say your name and what your affiliation is as far as boards. Craig, do you want to get us started?
So most of you I think already know me, I'm Craig Abernethy. I'm on the Ennis Town Commission as well as the Planning Board, Chairman of the Planning Board. Go ahead.
Corey Hardy, Ennis Town Commission.
Dave Merriman, Ennis Town, or the planning.
I'm Kate. I work for Corey, and he encouraged me to come and join you guys today.
I am Jennifer Young. I'm on the planning.
Great. Jerry Roby, I'm on the planning committee. Actually, I have a degree in urban studies and planning, worked for a planning office, drafted memorandums of understanding of each community of San Diego.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of where some of that's why probably I'm here. 3 years on the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors too, and then just happy to be invited.
Great.
Mark Sixel, just moved to the planning board.
I did my undergrad in San Diego, so.
Where?
Point Loma Nazarene.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was UCSD.
Okay.
We were close.
Yeah.
It's a long paddle though.
Definitely. All right, so dive into the presentation. You'll have copies in front of you. Feel free to take notes. So a lot of times this is kind of what we think of land use planning in Montana. It is a little more complicated than just deciding what side of the road you want to park the trailer, though. So there's a lot of state law, local regulation that you have to keep in mind when looking at this. One of the things I wanted to start off talking about was the meeting process, just because that's where you can really get in trouble. And it's one of those things where if you have a good meeting process, things just seem to run smoother. So the Montana State Constitution has a right to know and participate, which is one of the strongest rights to know and participate in the country, one of the strongest constitutional rights like this in the country. Public has the right to expect governmental agencies to afford a reasonable opportunity for citizen participation in the operation of agencies prior to final decision as may be provided by law. And no person shall be deprived of the right to examine documents or to observe the deliberations of all public bodies or agencies of state government and its subdivisions, such as the town of Ennis, except in cases in which the demand of individual privacy clearly exceeds the merits of public disclosure. So basically, the only way you get out of the right to participate is if you are dealing with employment stuff, if you are doing maybe a disciplinary action on an employee, or if you are in a legal case and you are consulting with your attorney. So you don't have to consult with, you don't have to have your legal strategies discussed in an open forum. But pretty much every other time, the public has the right to walk in, see what you're doing, observe what you're doing, and reasonably participate. So always err on the side of public comment, public participation. Generally, this means 48 hours notice prior to any meeting. So you have to have your agenda posted 48 hours in advance, at least. Agenda has to be available, minutes have to be taken. If it's a public hearing, it has to be properly advertised and properly noticed. You need a quorum to take any action. Typically, this is a majority of your membership. So if you have 9 members on a board, 5 of those constitutes a quorum, and you need a majority of the quorum in order to take any action. So if you only have 5 members of 9 present, 3 of them can run the meeting essentially. So that's why it's important to be here, because the people that show up make the rules. But it can be changed in your bylaws. So if your bylaws say a quorum is such and such, or you need so many votes in order to pass something, you have to go by your bylaws. So always default to your bylaws, and then next is Robert's Rules of Order. So if your bylaws don't say something, then Robert's governs. Where I've had this come up in planning boards is things like can the chair vote or not? So in Roberts, typically in a large committee, the chair does not vote. The chair is there to run the meeting, make sure that the public process is followed, rule on any points of inquiry. However, in smaller committees, usually the chair does vote. And a lot of times your bylaws will say something like every member has the ability to act as any other member, the rights afforded to any other member, which means that the chair would typically vote in a smaller board. Especially when you are all appointed to have a certain voice on the board, I think it's important that all those voices are exercised. So unless you're if your bylaws say the chair does not vote, or all members have the same ability to participate in the process, then the chair can vote. But the chair also does have that responsibility to run the meetings and make sure that everything's running smoothly. And I did add a link to Robert's, the frequently asked questions, which is a lot more useful than buying the Robert's 12th edition, which is about like that, and leafing through it. It's best to just go to the website or Google, what can I do in Roberts? Ex parte communication is another big one. Don't do it. So what's ex parte communication? It's oral or written communication made without proper notice to all parties and not on the public record. So all of your deliberations, as I mentioned, have to be in a public setting, have to be observable, have to be on the record. So if you meet with an applicant, let's say you're reviewing a zone change application or something like that, or a subdivision, and it's perfectly fine if you go out to the site and take a look at it. But if the applicant, the property owner, comes out and starts showing you around and talking to you about what a great project it is, don't do it, because you've just been biased. It's not on the public record. You'll need to disclose that. Meeting with an interested party. What if the neighbor happens to be your brother-in-law? Right. Hey, Bob, what do you think of this project that I just got noticed going on across the street from you? I hate it. It's going to block my view of the mountains. Not a big fan of it. You've just been biased. That conversation needs to occur in a public setting. Meeting even with other members of the board to discuss the application. You can do it, but it needs to be noticed. If you want to have a board meeting on site, if you want to have and some planning boards will organize a board tour of an area. That has to be noticed. Public has to be given the opportunity to show up and walk around with everyone, and minutes have to be taken. So if that's something you want to do, just be aware of that. And the big one is reply all on a board email. So you might have a situation where Susie sends out the agenda minutes and maybe a staff report on a project ahead of time. And if you click reply all and say, you know what, I've dealt with this guy before, he's a slime ball, we can't trust him, I wouldn't trust anything that they presented. Can't do it, you just biased your entire board. So be very, very careful when hitting reply all. You can hit reply and tell Susie, yeah, I'll be there, or whatever, but don't hit reply all. So what happens if ex parte communication does occur? You know what you should do? If someone calls you and says, hey, you're on the planning board, I know you're going to be seeing this project at your meeting next week. Got to tell you what a terrible idea it is. What do you do?
Disclose it, stop the conversation.
Yeah. So you know what? Thank you, but I can't talk to you about that outside of the meeting. Please come to the meeting. Say what you want to say then. If you can't come to the meeting, put it down in writing, send it to Susie, and it'll be read at your meeting. If you do have questions, because I'm sure if you're looking at a staff report or looking at an application, you'll have questions. If you have questions, instead of discussing it with the board or the applicant, give Susie a call, give me a call, and say, hey, I saw this in the staff report. I just have some concerns about how this is going to be done. Call your public works director, say, hey, they say they have enough water and sewer capacity. Do we really have enough water and sewer capacity? You can have those conversations with your staff. You cannot have them with interested parties.
So no two of these guys can meet up
No.
and discuss?
So,
Question, could you coordinate within the planning board who's going to contact the public works director to find out if there's enough sewage and or water in your example?
what I would recommend doing is if you have a question about water and sewer capacity is calling Susie or I and saying, hey, have you talked to the Public Works Director about this? And if so, what did he say? If not, can you contact them again or ask them to come to the planning board meeting to provide us with this information? And yeah, that's a good point about, what if you're at a basketball game and sitting 2 or 3 city councilmen or town commission members are sitting next to each other. You might be talking about the basketball game and not talking about town business. But what is the person sitting on the other side of the gym going to think when he sees 3 commissioners sitting together talking? So sometimes the perception is more important than what actually happens. So it doesn't mean you can't talk to someone else on the board. I'm sure you all know each other outside of your roles here, but just make it very clear that you're not talking about public business. So if someone says, hey, I saw you 2 had breakfast together the other day, were you talking about this project? No, we weren't. This is what we were talking about. And if there's something that you just can't avoid, someone starts talking to you and you don't realize that it's about an application that you're going to hear until it's too late, until they've already told you what they think, disclose it. When you're at the meeting, when you're they open up the public hearing, you can say, hey, so-and-so cornered me at the grocery store and told me they didn't like this project. I told them that, hey, I can't make any decisions right now, can't make any promises, can't really discuss it. Please come to the meeting. But just wanted you all to know I did have that conversation. It's not going to impact my decision making and the ability to discuss the project here. And so you can always disclose that as well. Yeah, so disclose it. There might be a situation where you do need to recuse yourself. Maybe the property's right next to you. Maybe the subdivision's going in darn near in your backyard. Is anyone here a realtor? A lot of times you'll have realtors on a board, or an attorney might be on a planning board, and their client might be the developer, where they might have an agreement to sell the lots after they've been completed, or sell the homes after they've been built. That's a very clear financial benefit in the application. So if there's a situation like that, say, hey, I've got a conflict of interest here. And if you are abstaining from the discussion, best practice is to go and sit in the audience. If you're abstaining from the vote, abstaining from the discussion, go ahead and sit in the audience. I do the planning in Carbon County as well, and we had a subdivision going in, and it was right across the street from one of our planning board members, and she was also a realtor, and was probably going to be selling those lots, but also didn't really want to be looking at these houses. And her husband were basically in charge of maintaining the roads in the area. They were all private roads, and she said, you know what, I have some big concerns about this, but since I'm right there, I don't feel comfortable about using my role on the planning board in discussing this. So she got up, she sat in the audience, and made her comments in opposition to the subdivision, and then rejoined the board after the discussion. Yes.
Would that not be up for a vote sometimes? Like hey, full disclosure, here's what I do, and here's my potential conflict. That would the board potentially vote on it at that point, or is it if you don't feel comfortable, you just exit?
So the best way is, in my opinion, is that if you feel you have a conflict of interest, disclose it, and you can either say it's not going to affect the way I vote, or need to go sit in the audience and not engage in this. And you make that yourself. You can't be forced to do that. So the board can't say, hey, you need to go sit in the audience. But you have to be aware of what if the rest of the board thinks you have a conflict of interest, so does the public. And you have to be aware of the perception. So that's kind of just and the board can remove you. And they can't express their desire to you on an individual basis that you sit in the audience if there is conflict. Another thing that I'd point out, just because I know it's a small town, everyone knows everyone, and a lot of people do business with each other. I don't think you need to you don't need to recuse yourself because someone came and had a drink at Willie's last week. You know, that's not, in my opinion, reason to recuse yourself from voting. Just because, yeah, I go to church with them, my kids are in the same grade, so I need to recuse myself from the vote. I don't think that's a good reason. Only if you've had ex parte communication, or you have a direct financial tie to the project. I did some work over in eastern Montana during the Bakken boom, and there was the planning board over there and I think they had 13 members on the planning board, and without it, every single time I went in there, 8 of them would stand up and recuse themselves. Like, oh yeah, I've done business with his brother-in-law. Oh yeah, I've known him since he was a kid. Come on, guys, we need a quorum. We can't have the entire planning board just say, yeah, we can't vote on this.
I have a question. So if I'm on the planning board, Commissioner, I have a brother or sibling or someone in family who's also a realtor or maybe a developer. Is that a conflict of interest?
Do you directly benefit from the project financially?
Okay, so that would constitute.
Yeah, has to be a direct financial benefit. So if
his brother was the developer for the project you're trying to approve, you might want to disclose that.
yeah, you'd probably want to disclose that, and you might want to recuse, and that might be too close. But if it's your aunt's sister-in-law, you might still disclose it, but say, yay, you know, I see him at weddings and funerals. We're not that close. I don't have a direct benefit to it. Because if you start, you can, I think there's a slippery slope where you can really get down to, yeah, if someone moves into the area, I might directly have a financial benefit because the value of my house could increase. Therefore, my net worth increases. Therefore, I have a financial benefit. It has to be when the lots sell, I'm going to make money off of it. Or your immediate family, so your wife or kids. Yeah, if it's your brother-in-law doing it, or a niece or nephew or something, that does not generally constitute direct financial benefit. And when in doubt, talk to your town attorney. Give James a call and say, hey, this is the situation. What do you think? Or you can call me. You can call Susie, but we'll probably tell you to call James. Any questions on that? Or we keep going? Okay, so what can you expect in a public meeting? You'll have to adopt the minutes. Usually there'll be a staff report that Susie or I might present. If it's me, I'll probably be a disembodied face on the TV screen, or a voice on the TV screen. If there's a public hearing, you'll open the public hearing, accept public comment, then you have to close the public hearing. go into board discussion, and the planning board will make a recommendation to the town commission. Planning board does not have, generally does not have decision-making ability. It's a recommendation board. And then you do have to take public comments on matters not on the agenda, but under your jurisdiction. So you always have to have that opportunity, even if something's not before you yet. It could be someone coming in and saying, hey, so-and-so's been talking about this, what are you doing about it? Or you should change your zoning regulations to allow horses in town or something like that. You have to allow them to have that public comment. If you follow the agenda and run an orderly meeting, that solves 99% of the problems. So I've been in public hearings where after the public hearing closes, there's, people just want to keep beating the issue to death, right? Coming back to it and saying, well, what about this? What about that? So when you have a chair that can say, sir or ma'am, the public hearing is closed. We heard your concerns. The board is now discussing it. The board members can ask questions with the consent of the chair and the rest of the board. But you have to, once you've done the public hearing, it's time to move on into your discussion. There is also nothing wrong with adjourning the meeting and coming back later. So if there's a big project, and let's say you start your public hearing at 6 o'clock, and at 9:30, you've finally gotten through all of the public comment. There is nothing wrong with saying, you know what, we're going to come back next week, have a special meeting, and that's when we're going to make our decision. You don't want to delay things indefinitely, but a lot of times the best decisions are not made after a 4 or 5 hour meeting with 200 people in the room yelling at you, one way or the other. So we're going to stand at ease for a week. And you can even say, hey, we're going to take 5 minutes and have a bathroom break, have 5 minutes to get up and stretch your legs. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. Use the ability to do that. If you disagree with the decision of the chair, there's a process in Roberts to do so. You object to the decision of the chair, then you take a vote of the board, majority rules, and can overrule the chair. So if the chair says, hey, let's adjourn, you can object, or if the chair says, no, we're going to keep plowing through that, someone else can move to adjourn and majority vote. I've been in situations where the board has kind of wanted to argue over whether or not the chair's decision is proper, and that's not best practices. If you don't like the decision, just object to it and have a vote instead of arguing over what Robert's Rules of Order says, because it always comes down to the rule of 51. 50 plus 1% can pretty much do whatever you want.
Is there never an instance where a super majority is required?
There is. There are supermajority votes. I think Roberts requires a supermajority to suspend your rules. So if your bylaws say something, you can have a supermajority to suspend the bylaws to do something. If your bylaws require a supermajority vote to amend your bylaws, that could come up. Roberts does require, I believe, a supermajority to replace the chair, maybe. So there are supermajority votes in Roberts. In my experience, it doesn't come up much in a planning board session.
Would that be like to put an item on the agenda, for example? Would that be
You cannot put an item on the agenda for discussing the day of.
right?
It has to be 48 hours in advance. Typically, what works is if there's an item you want on the agenda for discussion, let like Susie know a week ahead of time so she can put that on the agenda.
But if the mayor refuses to put it on,
Well, on the planning board side, it'd be the planning board chair.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if it doesn't, you could move to put it on at the next meeting. And that would be a vote of the board to add something to the agenda for the next meeting. And I can't recall off the top of my head if that requires a sweep majority or not. But yeah, you can't add something the day of. It has to have at least 48 hours in advance. So if you do talk about something that's not on the agenda, if someone does come in and wants to chat about something, you can discuss it, but you can't make a decision. So you can't, if someone says, hey, I think you should go and fix the potholes. I move we go and fix them. You can't do that. It's not formally on the agenda. Your decisions cannot be arbitrary, capricious, or unlawful. That's where you will get sued and lose. Arbitrary is based on choice or discretion, not based on anything else, just based on how you're feeling that day. Capricious, unpredictable, changes from day to day, person to person, and unlawful. Can't do something that's illegal. Can't make a decision that's not a legal decision. So if a decision is arbitrary, capricious, or unlawful, you risk losing that court challenge to the decision. It's something that staff will try to warn you about if you're going down that road. But when you're making decisions, you have to just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Are we being consistent? Is this decision backed up by state law, by the town code? Are we doing something complete? Did we see a similar application last year and made a completely different decision than what we're making this time? Because that's how you get sued and that's how you lose. So let's walk into zoning a little bit. So I put the enabling statute on the screen. So the state zoning enabling statute for municipalities is 762301. There's 3 zoning parts in state law. So 76 part 1 is a citizen initiated zoning district, which you're probably not ever going to have to deal with in a municipality. It's where people can get together and say, hey, we want to create a zoning district for this purpose. And then it's typically goes through county commissioners. It's fairly common with counties. And the county commissioners have to make a decision of whether or not to adopt that. Part 2 is county zoning. So counties can zone all or a part of their jurisdiction. And then part 3 is the municipal zoning. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about part 1, part 2, and part 3 zoning. But really all you have to concern yourselves about with the town is part 3 zoning. So that's specific to municipalities. And then you have the Ennis zoning ordinance, which is available on the town's website. And you can click on the town code and read through that. I do have a copy. So your zoning code's about this big. It's not overly cumbersome. Does everyone have a copy of your zoning code or know how to get a copy of the zoning code?
No.
No. Okay.
No,
No, and no.
If you go to the town's website, you can click on the town code, go to zoning. It's Title 11 of the town code. And I'm sure that staff here can, Ginger or Susie can print you a copy if you would rather have a hard copy of the zoning code. I find it easiest, I downloaded it digitally, and I find it pretty easy to just do a word search. When someone has a question about, hey, can I do a what's a good example? Multifamily housing here. I type in multifamily in the search bar and just see how many places it comes up. And if it pops up as allowable under a zone or conditional under a zone, then hey, here's where you can and can't do it. So that's a pretty good tool, is to just have it digitally. Zoning map is also online. I pulled it in here. It is a little outdated, we've noticed. So if you are in doubt about what an area is zoned, talk to Susie. She'll give you the history, because I've done that a lot. So what can you do? So zone uses, generally broken down between what is permitted, what's a permitted use, and what's a conditional use. If it's a permitted, it's allowed. Generally, we say it's allowed by right. So you can do something because your zone allows it, and you don't need. It's on the screen. Oh, he's got it.
It's okay, Eric.
You can think first.
Hey, guys.
How's it going?
Good, you?
Good. So you don't need a whole lot if the use is permitted. You don't need to do much. Generally, you need you might need a site plan, just so staff can ensure that, hey, what you're doing does comply with the setbacks, the height limits, et cetera, and can be filed. We have that on record that yes, you can do that, but it's a pretty painless process. If it is a conditional use, it requires some additional review. And this is basically set up in findings in your code, right? That this area is good for this type of use, but if it's this other type of use, it deserves a little more review. Public hearing is required by the planning board. Planning board makes a recommendation to the town commission, and the commission approves or denies. And you can put conditions on that development that are specific to that development. There's also things you just can't do. If it's not permitted, if it's not conditional, it's not an allowed use. Yep.
So under permitted uses, it says site plan. Where's the approval come from? I get for conditional uses, it's planning for and for the town commission. So approve or deny.
So you have, and I do have a slide on this, but the way you have it set up in your code is you have two types of site plans: major site plan and a minor site plan. And major site plan does require additional review and approval. A minor site plan is administratively reviewed and approved. But that's basically if you're building a single family house in a single family district where it's a permitted use, and what you're meeting all the setback requirements, you're meeting all the height requirements, you're meeting all the parking requirements. You don't need any variances. It's permitted, right? The idea is that you don't want to tie up that application. You don't want to tie up the developer to go through a review that's, well, yeah, you're doing everything, right? So generally, site plans are administratively reviewed. And what percentage do you figure are administrative? Most of them, right? Vast, probably 95% are administrative.
So the grocery we did, the council voted on a site plan approval for that. Is that just due to the nature? It's just a large commercial project that requires a ton of planning.
Yep, that's defined, and the definition of a major site plan under your code. Yeah, and it's in the TND. So it's traditional neighborhood overlay district. So, and I'll go through exactly what that all entails, but yeah, it met the requirements for a higher level of review. Because that's a little more intense than a single family home in a single family district on a single family lot. So the zoning districts you have agricultural districts, you have residential districts. Your residential districts are broken down by density. You have mixed use districts. You have a couple different mixed use districts, and then you have non-residential, which is your highway commercial and commercial industrial. You also have a planned industrial district. And each district has unique permitted uses, conditional uses, as well as setbacks, lot sizes, etc. So I didn't go through what each of these are individually, mainly because I figured you could read that if you're really curious. And it's in your code. And typically, when something comes in that involves zoning, you're going to have a staff report that Susie or I or both of us will have looked at, gone through. We'll tell you what district it is and what is, whether it's permitted or conditional or whatever. If there's a zone change, we'll tell you this is what it would permit, this is what it would not permit. These are the ramifications of your decision. And you can always do your own. I mean, you don't have to take my word for anything. I'm sure Susie would say the same thing. You don't have to take our word as gospel, but we'll try to give you the information to find the information and make up your own minds as much as possible. Sir.
So I'm gathering out of this, Forrest, you're gonna be here for a while. This isn't just a one-time presentation consulting gig.
So no, so I've been working with Ennis for what, about 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, and usually remote. So I don't drive in all that often, only if needed. But I will. So a lot of times, Susie will send me something to draft up a staff report or something, or give an opinion. Nikki might call me and ask for an opinion, and we'll either talk through it on the phone or I'll write something up. Sometimes Susie and I will kick back and forth staff reports, just proofreading it. And did you think of this? What should we do here? What did we do last time? And I'll call into town commission meetings when there's something. I think the last one I was on was there was a work session for the hospital annexation. I think that was the last one I called in on. And then I was on for the grocery store as well. So you might see me more online than in person, but I am available. I'm still under contract. So.
No, that's great. It just adds consistency. So thank you for your support.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier in the introduction.
I know, maybe everybody else knew.
Was there another question? Yeah.
I was, so you were up in Helena earlier this year. What were you, could you talk a little bit about that? What you doing?
Sure. So I am a state senator. I represent Senate District 29, which is Stillwater County, Carbon County, and most of Sweetgrass County. So I do spend 4 months every 2 years playing lawyer in Helena. And I am involved in a bunch of land use stuff in the legislature up there. So yeah, my availability does get a little limited, but generally for evening meetings, I'm available. Some of those commission meetings I was calling in from the Capitol. So,
yeah.
But yeah, that's another shoe I wear. You do have an overlay district, that's that TND that Susie mentioned. So it's pretty well defined in your regulations and your zoning ordinance. It gives developers basically some flexibility on the exact requirements of your code, but then it sets up another process that you have to go through in order to take advantage of that. So there are certain design criteria in the overlay district that they have to go through. But it generally gives the developer the ability to go outside of the design parameters that are would typically fall in the district, and also gives staff and the planning board and the commission the ability to not follow the zoning ordinance strictly. So an example would be like setbacks. You can, if the developer says, hey, I'm not going to be able to meet the setbacks in the zone, but it's in the TND and meeting all the other criteria in the TND, we can say, okay, that makes sense. So maybe just look at it in a more holistic type of way.
Willie's wrote the first T&D agreement there was with his town.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and there is a public hearing recommendation on that. So it is kind of a give and take. There's advantages on the developer side to get some of that leeway from the design criteria, but there is also a bit more of a process. So site plan review, this is kind of what we were getting to. Major site plan, so this is what the grocery store was. 3 or more dwelling units, this is 4. So if there are 3 or more dwelling units, 5,000 square feet or more of non-residential space, more than 1 building, which would be office, retail, or industrial uses, 10,000 square feet or more of exterior storage, parking for more than 10 vehicles, then it's reviewed by the planning board and the town commission. So a lot of commercial type developments are going to fall under this requirement just because of that. I mean, you're not going to have a whole lot of intense commercial developments that are less than 5,000 square feet, right? You're not going to have a whole lot of commercial developments that have parking for less than 10 vehicles. So these are more of a mom and pop type of commercial business, might not meet the major site plan, but if it's a grocery store or something a little more intense like that, it's going to require review by the planning board and the town commission. Otherwise, unless it's in the TND or a conditional use, it's administratively reviewed. So that's where 99% of the time when people are doing something, it's simple. Moving a shed onto my property, building a house. So what happens if you can't do it? If what you want to do, or what the developer wants to do is not allowable, it's not permitted, not conditional, it's not in a DND where they have some leeway and can negotiate their way through some stuff, what do? There's a couple of processes. You do a variance or a zone change. So a variance request goes through the zoning board of adjustment, which is the first time I've said that today. It's one of the few things that go through a board of adjustment. The zoning board of adjustment does the public hearing. They have to make a finding that it's not contrary to the public interest, that it's a unique circumstance that would cause an undue hardship if the variance was not granted. The spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance would be observed and substantial justice would be done if the variance is granted. The variance would be consistent with the growth policy or comprehensive plan, and we'll discuss what a growth policy is a little bit. And you may not grant variances that would allow the use of a property that is not allowed by the zoning ordinance in that zoning classification. So if someone's in a residential district and they want to do put a Costco in there, and it's not allowed, it's not permitted, because it's commercial, it's not a conditional use because it's major commercial use. They can't request a variance and say, just allow me to build my Costco as a variance. So it can't allow something that is not permitted. When we say hardship, that does not include financial hardship. So someone can't come in and say, it's just way too expensive for me to do what the zoning code requires. Therefore, I need a variance. Or, you know what? I could make a lot more money if I didn't have to provide the setbacks. If maybe I want to do a Walmart, but I only want to provide 20 parking spaces because it's just going to make me a lot more money if I can fill up the parking lot with commercial space. That's not a hardship. So what's a hardship? An example would be if maybe you have an old lot in town and it's oddly shaped. Maybe it's like a pie-shaped lot or something. And there is no way you could put a reasonably sized home on the property without encroaching into the setback. That would be a hardship. Or one thing I seem to be seeing a lot around the state is people that will order a manufactured home and just cannot get a manufactured home that will fit on their lot and meet the setbacks. So that happens fairly often. But a variance is supposed to be a unique circumstance. So when the Board of Adjustment is looking at a variance, what they're looking at is this unique? Is this basically a one-time thing? If you're getting a lot of variance requests for the same thing, it's probably a problem with your zoning code. And a lot of places do have this, where even Billings had this. They call it the 5-minute variance, where everyone needed a variance because something in the zoning code just wouldn't allow them to do this. So they had it set up where you'd almost automatically get a variance. They updated their zoning code to get around it. So if you're seeing, maybe you have a 20-foot height limit. I know you don't, but if you had a 20-foot height limit, and someone said, there's no way I can build a house with a decently pitched roof and be under 20 feet, that's ridiculous. And you were just, the town was just saying, well, yeah, you're right, that's way too short. We'll just request a variance, we'll grant it to you. What you should do is update your zoning. Because it needs to be something unique. Variances should not set precedents if done correctly. Yep. Question? No. The other thing you could do is a zone change. So for that example, if you are in a residential district and you want to build a Costco, you can request a zone change to something that would allow you to build the Costco. And then you have to go through the planning board. Planning board reviews zone change requests, hold a public hearing, make a recommendation to the town commission. The town commission will hold another public hearing and make the final decision. The thing that comes up a lot in zone changes is spot zoning. Have you heard that term before? Spot zoning? Spot zoning is basically illegal. There's 3 factors that the state Supreme Court has set up to determine whether or not a zone change is an instance of spot zoning. And they are, the proposed use is significantly different from the prevailing use in the area. The land area is small from the perspective of the number of separate benefited landowners from the proposed change. So if it's like one lot in the middle of a big zoned area. They just want to change the zoning on that one lot. It's small, it only benefits one landowner. And the zoning change is defined to benefit one or a few people. Those are the three criteria. Generally, they all need to be met in order for it to be spot zoning. If someone brings that up, we will look at it, but if no one has an issue with it, is it spot zoning? If someone wants to build a little restaurant in a residential area and they request a zone change to commercial and the neighborhood absolutely loves it, everyone comes in and says, this is a great idea, can you do it? Sure. But if the neighborhood shows up and says, this is spot zoning, then you need to take a look at, are these three criteria met or not? And if they are, then it's probably spot zoning and you might want to say no.
I think there's, I guess, one interesting thing with our town codes where the mayor has stated that a lot of other zoning in other towns specifically states what you cannot have in those zoning areas. So you kind of rule it out. Like we had a difficult time with the car wash out here. Well, it doesn't say car wash in there. We were trying to decide what exactly does fit into or what the zone or the law, the town's rules say. So do you think is that something that you see a lot with other towns codes? Or recommendation that you would have for our town codes?
There's not, I guess I don't often see unpermitted uses in a list of unpermitted uses zone by zone. Some places will do that, but the problem you run into with that is if something doesn't fit neatly into the permitted use, conditional use, and not permitted use, then where does it go? So generally, if the assumption is if it's not permitted, if it's not conditional, then it's not allowed. But the other issue is definitions. And I think that I've seen that, and we've had those discussions a bit, is what does it mean by service station? What does that mean? Is that a car wash? Is it a gas station? Is it an oil change shop? What is a service station? Because you'll say service stations are a permitted use in some zones. Or my favorite is probably the essential services. What is an essential service? And how does your code define that? Well, if it's not clear, then anything can be an essential service. And if you believe in it, it's an essential service, right? So I think in a situation like that, it might be beneficial to amend your code to say what is and is not an essential service. Or take that term out and think through what you want as permitted and conditional zone by zone. The other area where we had that conversation here not too long ago was about RV parks. And because RV parks are not listed as a permitted use or conditionally permitted use in any zone in Ennis. So my position was that RV parks are not an allowed use in Ennis. And there was a developer that said, but Ennis has adopted standards in their zoning code for an RV park. So you have standards for it, but you don't have it as an allowed use anywhere. And my position was, well, you can have standards for something that's not permitted, because you can have pre-existing non-conforming uses. And you still want to have standards for that. So what they did, which is a kind of a third option, which I didn't put up here, was you can do a text amendment request. So Ennis has a process where you can request a text change to the zoning code. So what those individuals did was they came to the town commission with an application and said, we would like the town to change their zoning code to make RV parks I think they wanted it a conditional use in one of the districts, one of the residential districts, I think. And the town had the conversation about, is this something we want? Is this a use we want to permit? And if so, is it a use we want to permit in the zone requested? And ultimately you chose no, that's not something we want to open up, which is perfectly fine. That's up to the town. But if there are situations where you might see an instance where we say, that's in our opinion, that's not a permitted use. It's not a conditional use, so it's not allowed. Someone says, well, gee, I think it should be allowed, and they can apply for that zone text change to add daycares or whatever into a zone. And that would be the way to go about it. Any questions here? Otherwise, I think it's a pretty good time for a break. We've been going for about an hour. 5-10 minute break or something. All right.
Did everybody get a chance to sign the
Oh yeah, sign in.
meeting? Susie, did you?
I did not.
10 minutes.
Come back about 10 after 2. I've got a big clock I can look at, so.
I didn't. It's maybe one of the first one.
You know what I think about sugar?
How was your drive down?
Not bad.
No?
No, yes. Have a nice day. The same, we should have moved it outside. Moved this outside.
Yeah, but the wind blows here. We have to, can I still one of these, please?
Oh yeah, please.
We have to, like, have rocks holding our stuff down.
It's nice to drive, everything's green.
You know, it's so pretty. But the river's all muddy and icky and.
Pretty high.
The Madison was the clearest one I saw.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you're still gonna be available.
Yeah. Yes, I'll be around.
What's the current process? Is you're basically the planning board prior to all of us trying to keep up to speed. When do you normally get alerted and how is information handed back and forth and distributed?
Yeah, so usually things will come into Susie and, or the Ginger. It comes in somewhere. But it goes to Susie and Susie will send it to me. So you scan it or forward me emails or whatever. And then
I'll review it against the zoning code.
Yep, I'll do my findings, dig into it a little bit, depending on what Susie wants me to select on the Madison food stuff. I'll work with the developer directly and say, hey, you need to get us this information, and they'll send it to me. I'll try to keep Susie in the loop so she has it in her files. And whenever it's ready for the commission, I'll have that work wrapped up and make sure Susie has that for distribution. Then there's some stuff like the Lormia. Susie did that report, and her and I just kind of talked through it a little bit. So she sent me the staff report, and I review it, hey, think about this, How does this work?
So how will that be handled? Then, going forward?
My guess is it'll be handled pretty much the same. You'll just have the planning board would, kind of intercept things between staff and the commission. And I hope that that will kind of take some of the pressure off the commission for some of these meetings that have gone long.
That's what I get.
Right. Yeah, because,
Your idea.
yeah, I mean, when you guys are trying to pass a budget or something, you have to deal with massive hoops. I mean, that can take 2 hours and you're not even getting to stuff you should be spending your time on the commission. So if the planning board to take care of the public hearing part of it and kind of beat some of these issues to death, make a recommendation to the commission that says, hey, these are the issues you need to focus on.
Sure, it's a
And especially with you on this come up with the planning board.
very common questions.
And then I kind of see my role, and I'm not sure this is
Just
shared by a lot of planners, but when I talk to the planning board, my job is to make sure that you're thinking about everything you need to be thinking about to make a recommendation. Once you make a recommendation, it goes to the council, and they're asking me questions on that. My job is to relay the planning board's recommendation and why that recommendation was made. If the planning board does something I think is illegal, then I'm gonna tell the commission. The board's recommendations that I want to make sure that the commission has.
You're able to run it like this now, and my eyes don't.
Distributed similar to our
No, there are no.
It's all town.
I go,
That she also did that for the planning.
drive over that hill.
And then I would see.
I think, my guess is that
Especially.
I don't know that.
Straight back.
All that information together and send it out.
I want.
Would it be similar, probably, the way the town. Oh, I could tell, it's clear.
Oh, it's my argument.
Yeah.
Exactly. To your meeting, and that's where you have your.
Oh, no, can't have that, my husband.
Because there's still a,
You know, and it's,
a governing body.
that always makes me sad. But, you know.
So it's gonna be similar to the. And then that would stand for the town commission here.
Then I don't see that.
Yeah.
It all is very, it's all.
It's already been vetted. And ultimately, the goal is to have a planning board that is pretty sophisticated in what to look at when these applications.
Unless you got.
If it is variances, some changes, pretty experience in how to handle that.
Yeah, I was.
Commission, faith and trust in the planning board to work it out. Take initiative and know what to talk about.
Yeah, it's good.
Those look like.
Really, there's no one that usually takes place, or is it kind of?
It really depends on the application. So usually I try to figure out what they want to do. Sometimes it's not always clear, right? the application might not be a very high quality. So sometimes it's sit down, try to figure out if I understand what the application is asking. Because if I don't understand it, then I have to kick it back and say, hey, I have to want it, and I can't review something that I don't understand. Then I will, if I understand what's going on, then I'll open up the code and see what the zoning code says about what they're trying to do. Is it allowed, is it not allowed? Are they following the right process? They submit a variance request, is that appropriate for what they're asking for? Is it conditional use better, or are they asking for something that's completely not allowed? And then I'll, if there's issues, I'll work with the applicant to make sure that they're requesting the right things. Sometimes I can be able to, I mean, I've had people request, I do hardened also, city park. And I had a guy, a month or so ago, wanted to do like a greenhouse, and requested a zone change to build a greenhouse on his property. And I got looking at it, and like, well, the zone change, the zone you requested doesn't allow a greenhouse. So you're not getting what you're asking for. That was, it was, the property was kind of between two zones. One of them did allow greenhouses. Why did you request zone change to this zone? And that gets you what you're
I sat in on the water sewer engineering meetings, and the engineer from the water side who talked about the situation we're in right now made the comment that we should not have any additional permits provided at this time until the water system is rebuilt, constructed completely and done. So how do we work through that?
Well, so there's a permit. Then it never comes before, probably, or may never come before the planning board.
So change the verb.
It's administrative.
That's so if you have an application that you did say don't feel
They're working on the details of
or
reporting.
needs to stay by 5%,
Yes.
then that's where those conditions.
His license to the grade, they could say up until two, they could.
So if someone's doing a development, you can require to update, upsize their water
Did you bar to sell it, or did you just transfer it direct?
to provide water to it.
You know, the verbiage of what it is.
If they're not going to do that, water, they're not going to have water and sewer, and then it's not going to get done. Whether you conditionally
But
approve
how
it
about
or not,
not just
it's not going to
transporting
happen.
back and forth between the two
Yes, like
buildings? That's the weird thing.
It is, and he could technically do that.
You can also, there's some other tools that are out there.
You know, some politicians in the
You
past.
could,
How do we actually do
you
it?
could adopt
I mean, you know, back these.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they're like, oh, yeah, you did it. You don't have to back report all these things.
Sure, well, that was even though Willie's whiskey and water, like, have a big party at the end of 5K right there, and then all of a sudden, it's like, can't do that anymore.
Like drilling a well.
Such a good.
Yeah, so you don't allow private wells.
Yeah, because we don't have, right now, our well systems are,
So one thing.
we don't have the capacity to support the current water use of the town during the summer, because I think our summer demand goes, because a lot of the tourists come in. So our demand goes way up.
The value add.
What Eric, or the engineer in the meeting stated that you don't have that support right now. So I'm curious, just to even, where do we move, how do we move forward?
There's no impact. So the developers, when they want to build something, or develop something, there's no contribution to water and sewer, or fire, or any of that infrastructure. And stuff. If the decision is that there should be.
Miller, you
how do
see
you
an actor
arrive
or
at
against
a
a
number point?
You have to do an impact fee study. So you have to establish, you can't use impact fees to fix an existing, if you don't have enough water right now, you can't use an impact fee to pay for the existing deficiency.
You used to own the,
So what you do in an impact fee study is you set up
your,
what's our,
back.
where we're supposed to,
But he just, he
where would
didn't
we
sell
be
it.
based on energy opportunity. And then you basically, you can put a number to what it's gonna take to update to where you would be based on projected growth. Divide that by the growth that's take you to that, and that's what your impact is.
Who does the impact? Do that, does like engineering firms do that?
Yeah, engineering
Like
firms
that?
would do it, yeah, because you need an engineer.
That's
Should we get back to stuff? We're making good time, and we can circle back on these questions. Have more of the discussion now as well.
Across the board, they did that?
That's the question.
All right, so yeah, we're making good time. I don't want to keep you here forever. Hopefully we can all enjoy the good day. But yeah, if you do have questions, don't hesitate to ask questions. I do want to talk a bit about extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction, because this is weird. Montana law, and that's the citations up there, 762310, allows municipalities to exercise jurisdictional authority outside of city limits for both subdivisions and zoning. So Ennis, as a town, same for a town or a city of the third class, can exercise jurisdictional authority for 1 mile outside of the municipal limits. For larger cities, that radius increases. But for Ennis, it's 1 mile. So the city enforces a zoning ordinance within this area. And Ennis does have this. It's a discussion I've had a couple of times over the last few weeks, is because you have an extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction, right? So if we look at the
Not reflected in that.
that zone map, so that zoned area does not end at city limits, right? So you do exercise zoning outside of your city limits. And your zoning code does say that if there's a use for 1 mile outside of city limits, it falls under your zoning code. But you don't have to do it. It's completely discretionary. There's a lot of communities that can do that do not. Because it's kind of a pain, right? If you have someone that lives outside of city limits, they're not voting for the town commissioners. They're not voting for the mayor. But the town commission is setting up zoning that impacts their property. So it can be a bit of a tense issue in talking about it. Whitefish is up in the Flathead Valley has really gone through this conversation, extraterritorial jurisdiction. But for a growing community, it might be something that risk is worth taking. Because if you're growing, you don't want a use that's completely incompatible with the zoning on one side of the highway that's not in, it's in city limits and not compatible with the use going in on the other side. What if someone wants to put in a nuclear power plant right outside of city limits? Is that something or a fertilizer plant is kind of the classic example. Someone wants to put a fertilizer plant 200 feet away from a residential zoning district. Is that good, or is that something that the city should be exercising that zoning jurisdiction on?
So how's that communication supposed to occur between the county? Where is there?
So the county, if you're doing this properly, the county commissioners would be able to appoint a couple of board members to the planning board. And I don't know how it's set up, if that's
On the county planning board?
to the city planning board. If that's something you want to keep pursuing, that would be something to discuss. It's allowing the county to appoint a couple of members to the city planning board. That way there's that kind of that feedback loop.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it might be something that Ennis just decides, it's not worth it. It's not worth fighting that battle, not worth tracking down board members that live within, sometimes you call it the donut area, the zoned area that's not in city limits. So that's a conversation that you might want to have.
And that's the zoning board. All the members on the zoning board have to live within 1 mile of, in the town of Donut.
Right, so yeah,
And that's appointed by the county and approved by the board.
the county commissioners would appoint board members that live in that donut area, to the city planning board. And it would not, and they basically directly report to the county commissioners, not the city commission, not the other city planning board members. They would be co-equal members. So Columbus does this. They do have a city county planning board that has jurisdictional authority over the city limits of Columbus and a donut area. They don't take the whole mile. It's a third-class city, so it has the same abilities as Ennis. They don't take the whole mile, though. They do have membership broken down where the county commissioners will appoint a couple of board members from the donut area. The issue that you can probably imagine is there's not a lot of people in the donut area. There's probably 60 people that live in the Columbus extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction, and it can be hard to find members out of that group. But that's something to consider as you move forward and think through some of these issues. Now that you have a planning board, how you want that to look.
Who makes the decisions then on that?
Yeah, so it would be, so who makes the decision? So if you have a zoning question or zoning permit outside of city limits, who makes the decision? The city commission. Yeah, so the planning board would still make a recommendation to the city commission. The city would exercise that extraterritorial jurisdiction. So you can see why it gets a little tense. If you have people that aren't in the city limits, get decisions made for them.
So as the county appointed board members, are they involved in everything the city does, or just things that are in the donut area?
Everything on the planning board. So they are co-equal members. So if it's a project right in the middle of town, yeah, those county appointees are still voting on that. So that's a discussion we've had about whether or not that's something that needs to go away, be more formalized, or how to handle some of that. Any more questions on how that works? Another example I've dealt with recently is Red Lodge does not do extraterritorial zoning jurisdiction. The county, Carbon County, handles everything outside of Red Lodge. Red Lodge has their own planning board, their own planning staff, and Carbon County has its own planning board and planning staff. And there will be issues where, well, there was we dealt with about a 12-lot commercial subdivision right outside of Red Lodge. I don't know if you're real familiar with the area, but Red Lodge is kind of down in the valley. And then up on the bench is in the county, and there was this commercial subdivision going up on the bench, and there was concern about lighting regulation. Because the city of Red Lodge has about 15 pages of lighting regulations in their zoning code. Carbon County has about 2 lines of lighting regulation in their zoning code. So there was a discussion about how that's gonna work. Can someone go put a bunch of floodlights on these storage units right outside of town and create light pollution? Or should the city be exercising some of their zoning control? What they asked was that the county basically change their rules to regulate for the city. The county declined.
So we got floodlights?
So they might, they could.
So if we decide to, and I guess we already have the 1 mile inclusion area or whatever, do the county have to appoint somebody? I mean, do they have to appoint
They
a
should
board
be
member?
given the ability to do so. So that's something we'll have to work through probably within the next year or so, whether or not we want to make sure that it's formalized, because without a city planning board, that was never really done. Or if it's something that's not worth continuing and having that relationship. What are your first big decisions? So what does the zoning board of adjustment do? I want to make sure I touch on this because the duties and responsibilities are really broken down in statute. It's state law, what your responsibilities are. Zoning board of adjustment, here's variance requests. They have to have a public hearing. There's a 10-day notice. That's in your zoning code. You have to have a notice there, the public hearing for at least 10 days ahead of time. They also hear appeals of administrative decisions by statute. So those administrative site plans, if one of those comes in to Susie and she okays it, a neighbor that doesn't like that opinion can say, I don't like it, I'm going to appeal it. I don't think that site plan permit should have been issued for the doghouse in their backyard or whatever.
The car wash.
The car wash.
My decision.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And it goes to the zoning board of adjustment to make a decision on that administrative decision. If someone says it could be an interpretation on, let's say, an allowed or a conditional use, or what a definition really means. And if Susie and I look at the code and say, yeah, our decision is that RV parks are not allowed in city limits, then they could say, no, you're wrong, and appeal that to the zoning board of adjustment.
I'm confused. Who actually is this zoning board of adjustment? Does it exist today? Is it county or is it us?
It does exist. Yeah. Do you know who's on there?
Yeah. Maria Lake is chairman.
Yeah, I don't need the names as necessary. I was just
Town
wondering,
or county?
county or city,
It's-
City.
and it exists today.
Yes, it does.
Cool. Yep.
Five members on it. And
Nice.
that says approval requires 4 yes votes. So is that what's,
That's in statute. Yeah.
that's a super majority? Isn't that what that is?
Yeah, basically.
Yep. So if you had 3 members, say 2 things happened, whatever,
I think you have to have at least 5.
right, so that would be a non-existent board until you added those members.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, so yeah, statute says you have to have 4 affirmative votes for any decision.
No matter if you have 10 on there.
Well, you can set that up, so you can move that number up. But typically what places will do is have 5 Board of Adjustment members with 4 votes. And you can combine boards. Some places will combine planning board and Board of Adjustment, or I know places where the town commissioner or town council is the Board of Adjustment. So it's just things you can do. This work, the process you have works fine. And these decisions can be appealed to court. They go to court.
So if we're like short members for the planning board and or the zoning board of adjustments, can we pull members from there to appoint
You could co-appoint.
temporarily, or is it?
I would not recommend mixing and matching as needed.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do that, I'd recommend appointing a member to multiple boards. Because that's the way this works, right? I mean, 20 people are on every single board in the county, right? So if you needed to do that, I'd recommend a permanent appointee to the board, because you can serve on multiple boards. Otherwise, you could look at board consolidation. And it was actually a bill that passed that created a structure that you could use to consolidate all of your land use boards to one, if you wanted to. It's optional, and it was my bill, so. Great. The League of Cities and Towns really liked it, actually, so. But those decisions, like I said, they get appealed to court, it's not a recommendation. It's an actual decision the zoning board of adjustment can make. The city can set it up to where the town commission has the final say. But the way it's set up in your zoning code right now, the zoning board of adjustment is appealable to the court. There was actually an issue, I think it was in Billings, where the board of adjustment had made some decisions that were a little shaky legally, and they got sued. And the city council was like, wait a minute, we didn't even see this decision, and we have our attorneys defending this in court. So now there is a process where if the city wanted, if it was an issue, you could have oversight on the board of adjustment decisions. But you don't. The planning board's job description is review conditional use permits. And again, those do need a public hearing with at least 10 days public notice. Zone change requests, which also require a public hearing. For those, there's a 15-day notice. You do major site plan reviews, which we've mentioned, and subdivision reviews. Subdivision reviews may or may not require a public hearing. If they do, 15-day notice. And that depends on whether or not it's a major or a minor subdivision. Growth policy reviews start with the planning board. You're doing a growth policy update that will originate with the planning board. And all of the planning board's decisions are recommendations. So the planning board does not have decision-making ability. It's a recommendation board.
Could you walk me through that a little bit?
Sure.
I know we can't blind, you can't reply all, so like, how does the conversation occur to make the recommendation?
Meeting in the meeting. Yep.
So we're gonna recommend as a group, no discussion before.
You will discuss at the meeting. So you'll have
We have our own meeting.
Well, that's not what I'm understanding. When I said Thursday meeting, I was meaning the actual like commissioner meeting, town hall meeting. You're telling us we can't speak as a board together?
So the board will have its own meeting,
Okay,
separate from the town commission.
this makes more sense.
So, yep, so if there's an application, so it comes in to Susie, she'll write up the staff reports, put the agenda together, send it out to the board members. This is when your meeting is. Here's the materials. The planning board will come together. You should have opened up your packet and read through the materials, but you should not have discussed them with anyone ahead of time. So you'll sit down at your meeting and chair will call the meeting to order. And if it's a public hearing, you'll open the public hearing, take public comment, close the public hearing. Then you go into the board discussion. And that's when you will decide, is this good, bad? Is it something we can put conditions on? Do we need conditions on it? What conditions should this be? Then someone will move. I move, we recommend approval subject to the recommended conditions of approval or conditions as discussed. And then that recommendation will be formalized. Probably Susie will get to do that and send it over to probably Ginger to put on the town commission agenda. When the commission meets, they'll have that as a line item. Could be the John Smith zone change application recommendation from planning board. And that recommendation will be read to the council. And then the council will say, awesome, planning board recommended this, looks good to me. I move to approve the zone change request as recommended by the planning board.
So that's great. So the actual planning board meetings is open to the public and minutes will be taken.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Perfect.
So the zoning board of adjustments has to, and you might have did this before I came, but the zoning board of adjustments has to appoint a chairman, and the chairman is responsible for the minutes. And is that, I haven't read it.
Yeah.
Wait, as to who takes minutes during the planning board meetings? Was that your question?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, and I haven't seen your bylaws, so that's something you want to check in the bylaws. If it's, if there's staff that does that, if it's chairman's duties, or the way we do it in Carbon County for the Carbon County Planning Board is they elect an executive secretary, which is another board member who takes the minutes. And he just types them up ahead of time and sends them to me for distribution about a week ahead of the planning board meeting. So those are all options, but minutes need to be taken. So someone needs to set the agenda, needs to type up an agenda, make sure it's posted 48 hours in advance. Someone needs to take minutes.
Now, could that recommendation basically be requesting more information? Like your previous example is their water and sewage to support this. Obviously, I imagine the public would have that concern. And if we did not have that documentation in front of us, I don't know how many days are involved in between these meetings, but like, we don't have to recommend yes or no. We could recommend, I don't know, until we could prove like the infrastructure would support the project type of recommendation. Does that work or no?
Typically, what I would recommend is something along the lines of a condition that says the developer has presented evidence to the town's engineer, to the engineer's satisfaction, that water and sewer capacity exists. And approve that with that condition. That way, you're not really punting it, but you're relying on the experts that the town has to make that determination.
Yeah, that's more efficient. Makes sense.
Because I've seen planning boards that will choose not to make a recommendation. And sometimes that's because that there's an even number of people show up. You have a 9-member board and one person can't make it. So you have 8 people there and they deadlock 4-4 and no one wants to come back the next week, or you're running up against a review timeline, because there are some timelines that you have to have a decision made. And sometimes that will necessitate no recommendation. sometimes if you can't get a quorum for the planning board, no one showed up, everyone's out of town that day, then it will go to the town commission without a recommendation from the planning board. So that can happen. But I usually recommend that you make some kind of recommendation. And no one says that all of your decisions have to be unanimous. I mean, if there's significant water and sewer concerns on it, and someone doesn't want to vote yes because there might not be capacity, you can sure vote no. If you recommend denial of an application, make sure that your decision is not arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful. So the way to do that, in my opinion, is document the reason for your decision. So if it's, with a water and sewer type of question, maybe you got something from Public Works or the town's engineer that says, yeah, there's not capacity unless a new well comes online or something like that. Maybe you're not comfortable recommending approval with that type of information. So you say, without having that well online, we're going to recommend denial. Now they can come back and resubmit once a new well's online, but that might be a reason to recommend denial. Now, if you don't have that information from the engineer, if it's, I don't think you want, if it's not documented, you probably don't want to rely on it for a recommendation of denial. If it's,
So we need a letter from an engineer to state.
yeah, if it's, hey, I heard it at the bowling league that the city doesn't have sewer capacity. That you can sure say that, I guess, but I would be, if the town council, town commission ultimately makes their decision based on a rumor from the bowling league, you could be in trouble legally.
If the town engineer states that information publicly in front of, at the commission meeting, can you use that? I mean, because that's a recorded.
Yeah, if
event, right?
if the city engineer comes in and says, I looked at this information even at your planning board meeting, right? Says, I looked at your information and there's no capacity. You guys cannot do this. And maybe it's traffic even, maybe this is gonna cause too much of a traffic impact in a residential area. You can say, we're gonna recommend denial based on the testimony provided by the engineer. When I review an application, when I'm putting together the staff report, I don't like to recommend denial. And the reason is because if it comes to you all, if it comes to the planning board, and you want to approve it or recommend approval, if I just recommend denial, I have not thought through how to mitigate those issues and what conditions could possibly put there to mitigate those conditions. So typically, if you see a staff report from me, it will be a recommendation of approval subject to conditions. And those conditions will be designed to mitigate those issues that come up. So that's when it might be subject to evidence that water and sewer capacity exists. Subject to a traffic impact analysis being completed that shows that there's not going to be a traffic safety created. If they've done a traffic impact analysis, maybe it's something that says the recommendations from that traffic impact analysis have been implemented. And that could be, a lot of times those conditions might not be doable. I reviewed a conditional use permit for it was a drug and alcohol inpatient treatment center. and it was in a residential area. This was in Carbon County. And some of the neighbors had concerns about this type of facility in a residential area. And we had in the zoning code, we have the ability to require fencing and screening from incompatible uses. So we just said, yeah, you can do it, but as a condition, you need to build basically a privacy fence around the perimeters of your development, your center. Well, they ultimately said, we're not going to build a privacy fence, and didn't do it. So I'm not saying adopt conditions that are unattainable to kill a project. What I'm seeing is a lot of issues that come up with a project are mitigatable. So think about how those can be mitigated and make those a condition. And best practices, tie your condition to your code. So, if someone's doing something and you want to put a condition that you have to spray for mosquitoes on your property every year. But if you don't have a mosquito spraying program in the town, that might not be enforceable, number one. Number two, you better be applying it to every other application that comes in. Otherwise, you're being arbitrary and capricious. So it has to be enforceable, right? It has to be something that can ultimately be enforced.
So I think that was one of the last conditional use permits that we put on was for the car wash. That was, that I remember anyways, that basically stated that we had to check with the engineer. They could do infrastructure work, but they couldn't actually have a car wash that was up and functioning until they got engineer approval and Eric's approval.
Right.
Who's Public Works guy.
Yeah, I do remember that. And I think we did something similar on the site plan for Madison Foods as far as like DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, as far as grading and drainage. And that's kind of the other thing I would say is use your experts. You don't have to re-engineer their water and sewer design for a project. You don't have to understand the math. I don't understand the math most of the time. You want to make sure, though, that they are working with someone who does understand the math before it gets final approval. So get approval by your engineer, get approval by the state agency that reviews it, that type of thing. Annexation is something you'll see from time to time. It's the process of adding property to the town. It is very prescriptive in state law. So state law is very clear step by step what you do for an annexation. So generally the thing I do with annexations is look at the application, what are they doing, find it in statute exactly what applies, because they'll have an annexation of government property. There's a statute for that. Annexation of wholly surrounded property. There's a statute for that. Annexation of property that's been petitioned by the landowner. There's a process for that. Usually the reason people will annex is because they want water and sewer, right? That's the benefit for them. So if they're in city limits, the town is obligated to provide services. This can be initiated by the town or a private developer. A lot of times it will be included as a condition on a large project. So if someone is subdividing property, doing a large subdivision, annexation can be required as a condition of approval. So it can be a separate process that has to be done prior to the final plat getting done. Generally does require a public hearing by the town. There'll be a resolution of intent. There's a protest period. Did someone eat in? There's a protest period and then a resolution that actually annexes the property. So a lot of times when you see an annexation, and we discussed this with the hospital, is they would have, if the town decides to annex the property, they would do a resolution of intent. And there can be conditions. So like water isn't an issue. With annexations, you can require that the town be given any subsurface water rights with the property. So that could be a condition. You have to do an annexation plan, that type of stuff, and all a condition. And then when it's all done, there'll be a final resolution that accepts that property to the town. Subdivision regulations, and honestly, subdivision is what I spend most of my time with. I'm pretty familiar with the subdivision process. You might not see as much within town limits. Generally, towns will deal more with the zoning side of things. But if you do see a subdivision, it's going to be a big, big deal. You have adopted the Madison County subdivision regulations by reference, which is fine, but as those change, your subdivision regulations might change. This is something that you might find beneficial to eventually maybe adopt Ennis subdivision regulations instead of relying on the county subdivision regulations. But it is completely acceptable to adopt the county's regulations. A major subdivision is anything that's 6 lots or more. It requires an environmental assessment and public hearing. A minor subdivision is 5 lots or fewer. And a subsequent minor subdivision is a subdivision of previously subdivided property. And the subdivision regulations do require reviews of subsequent minors as a major subdivision. So if someone has a subdivision in town, they want to split it even into 2 parcels, that is a major subdivision under your adopted subdivision regulations and requires a public hearing. And that would come through the planning board for review and approval. Subdivision is like another process that's pretty prescriptive in state law. State law requires that all subdivisions be reviewed for impacts on the primary review criteria. So you have to review subdivisions for impacts on agriculture, water use, facilities, local services, natural environment, wildlife habitat, and public health and safety. If any adverse impacts are identified, that's when you require conditions. So you can put conditions on a subdivision. And inability to mitigate those impacts may result in denial. And like I said, that's pretty much the norm on any application. Try to identify impacts. You try to identify possible mitigation of those impacts. And if there's no way an impact can be mitigated, that's when it's denied. But subdivision is a little more prescriptive in that you're only looking at the impacts on those 7 criteria. You can't go beyond that. There's even a statute that says you cannot deny a subdivision based on its adverse impacts on educational facilities. The idea being that you have people move into a community and then you build a bigger school. You don't build a bigger school and then have people move into your community. You don't create the bus stop before you have kids that need to get on the bus there. So that's kind of the idea. It's just, yeah.
There was talk about subdividing, I think Gianforte had some sort of proposed legislation where you could subdivide every lot in a municipality in half or something.
So there was nothing that passed to tax Ennis because it's all based on size and you're under the size thresholds. I think the smallest one was 5,000 people. But if you grow to 5,000 people, there is state law now that says, that preempts some local zoning, would say that you have to allow a duplex on a single family lot by right. So if you allow a single family home, you also have to allow a duplex. Then it's based on population that graduates. So I think if you're over 50,000 people, it's going to be a while before Ennis gets to 50,000 people. But if you get to 50,000 people, then you have to allow up to a fourplex by right on a single family lot. So, yeah, and the idea is to increase housing stock. And that's, if you don't do something similar, I think you allow multifamily by conditional use. But if, that's always something to think about. Upzoning is the technical word for it. So and upzoning is a fairly common strategy to increase housing stock. So it's, the American Planning Association is actually pushing similar stuff.
So did they do something like that in California though? Or
in some places in California, yes, they have required upzoning.
okay.
And a lot of spots on it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's not, none of that's required for Ennis, but something to keep in mind. Growth policy, so growth policy is authorized in statute. It's optional. It does have some things you have to do. So you can see that the statute says, if you adopt a growth policy, you must be guided by and give consideration to the general policy and pattern of development set out in the growth policy. But if you look under subsection 2, a growth policy is not a regulatory document and does not confer any authority to regulate that is not otherwise specifically authorized by law or regulations. The governing body may not control, deny, or impose conditions on any land use approval based solely on compliance with the growth policy. So, if you have one of those applications, and it's maybe your growth policy says, maybe you have a strategy that says we want to protect water and sewer capacity in the town. And someone has an application that you think is going to adversely impact water and sewer capacity. You can't say, well, growth policy says this, so we're going to deny your application. Now, it can be a part of your denial. It can be a part of the reason. You can say, growth policy says this, and the city engineer says this, so we're going to deny your application. But you can't run to the growth policy for denial or approval. So you can't say, well, we have to approve it. The growth policy says we like it. Your growth policy, I believe, says something about workforce housing. So you can't say, well, gee, these people are proposing a multifamily development. We have to approve it because it's in the growth policy. Nope, you have to go to your zoning regulations and your other regulations authorized by statute and approve it through that. So there's 3, if you're keeping track, there's really 4 planning statutes, right? There's annexation, there's zoning, subdivision, and growth policy statutes, and none of them work together. They all have completely different criteria. Some of them are regulatory, some of them are not. This is where things can get a bit complicated. Growth policies have to be reviewed every 5 years, provided it's necessary. The most recent growth policy for Ennis was done in 2014, but I believe you have one drafted that just hasn't been adopted. It was done by Cushing Terrell a couple of years ago. So if that's adopted, that would supersede this one. But this is the adopted one, as far as I know.
That's the one I have. I don't think the, what we're talking about.
Keep powering through. I'm about to get to my slides. Couple other things I wanted to talk about. Like I mentioned, rely on your experts. And you don't have to be an expert on everything, because there's a lot of other rules and regulations out there. So the Department of Transportation they have ownership of state roads and highways. Highway 287 goes right through Ennis. And the state has the ability to regulate that highway. So that can get a little touchy when you are reviewing a development that is using 287 for access. Is you want to make sure that there's proper access. Maybe they need a turn lane. Maybe they need a street light. Maybe they need a crosswalk. You ever tried to get MDT to do a crosswalk? It almost requires an act of God. I've had them straight up tell me, we don't have the body count to justify the crosswalk. So it can be frustrating, but you kind of have to trust the process. So if you, in my opinion, it would be very hard to deny an application based on its impact on Highway 287 when MDT says it's fine. Or MDT says, we'll deal with it later. Now, you can require a condition that says you have to get an approach permit from MDT and comply with any conditions thereof. And then your trusty MDT is going to do their homework and make sure that that approach permit is put in properly. DEQ is a big one, Department of Environmental Quality. They review water quantity, quality, wastewater, stormwater drainage, and solid waste disposal. So if you are extending a water or sewer line, DEQ is reviewing it. That is subject to DEQ review. Even in city limits, DEQ has to review a water or sewer main extension. Not a service line, but a main extension. The way they define a main is if there's multiple connections off of it. So you can't have, or you shouldn't have, multiple service lines coming off of the same tap, right? You should, that if you do, DEQ would review that, would define it as a main and review it. And I have seen some places where there's been older water systems in there where people were just pulling off of taps willy-nilly, and it has caused some huge issues when people go to try to get anything done because DEQ is reviewing little quarter-inch water lines as a main.
So I got a question on that. Was DEQ then involved with our recent mainline issues on Main Street?
Probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just curious.
You guys know?
They were.
They're involved? Yeah, just curious.
They were with the one where they drilled, when they bored into the main line.
Yeah.
They were definitely involved in that one. The other one, they have just replaced some valves,
Gotcha.
so they don't have to be involved with that.
Interesting. Thank you.
And there is a process, it's called a municipal facilities exclusion, which allows the town's public works departments and an engineer, they have an engineer, qualified engineer, to basically do the review for DEQ. So you'd apply for the municipal facilities exclusion. Your engineer would do as much as they feel like they can do, and then send a letter to DEQ saying, oh yeah, water's fine. Like, we reviewed the main extension, it was fine, we're good with it. And then DEQ wouldn't review that part. But there is usually DEQ gets involved in part of it. And your engineer can always say, nah, we're not reviewing a main, you have DEQ do that. We're not going to grant the municipal facilities exclusion. Also, stormwater drainage has become a bigger and bigger issue in Montana under some DEQ rule expansions. So that's something that's been more and more of a consideration. You can't flood out your neighbor. You have to retain stuff on site, or the town has to have a stormwater drainage system that's sufficiently sized to handle any post-development runoff. So that is looked at. And that's, again, something if you're reviewing an application and the neighbors say, well, where's all this runoff water going to go? Where's the snow melt going to go? A condition can be DEQ has to review and approve the application. And their review should ensure that stormwater drainage is properly accounted for on site. So that ends up being a fairly standard condition of approval.
As long as it's tied to the main water line and not a subsidiary, I understand.
So they review all stormwater drainage.
Okay, they do all of it.
If you are increasing non-permeable surface, falls under DEQ review. There are a couple exceptions. If it's over 20 acres, if the lot's over 20 acres, they would not review it. You're not going to run into that here. And they probably review something in that was of that size anyway, because it's going to fall under their review for water and sewer. But if it's out in the county, if it's a 20-acre piece of property, DEQ is not going to get involved in it. And honestly, if you're building a house on 20 acres, you're probably not flooding out your neighbor based on that development. At least I really hope you're not. But I have seen on stormwater drainage, I do some private work from time to time, and there was a guy who wanted to he wanted to build a patio on his house, and it was like a 2-acre piece of property, well and septic. It was in Yellowstone County, I think. And because he was increasing the non-permeable surface, he had to go back to DEQ to prove to them that he was not causing additional runoff. But DEQ opened up the entire application, and they re-reviewed his septic and well, and opened up the entire subdivision he was in and re-reviewed the entire stormwater drainage system. What was really funny is they told him he had to replace his septic system because it was within 100 feet of surface water. We're like, well, what surface water? It was his swimming pool. So a lot of times people will try to avoid DEQ review and approval, but the stormwater drainage plan can really catch some people. The DNRC does water rights. You can do about, so DEQ or DNRC will allow, basically you get 10 acre feet per year or 35 gallons per minute before you have to get a water right. And that can do about 10 to 12 single family homes or the equivalent. So that's why you'll see a lot of subdivisions in the country will be limited to about 10 to 12 homes because they don't want to go get a water right. If you have to go get a water rate, you're dealing with the Ennis. And the Department of Labor and Industry does building codes. So I don't know, Susie, you probably get a lot of calls from out of state construction firms saying, what's the frost line, what's the snow load, what's the wind load? Hey, if it's residential construction, better trust your contractor. If it's a commercial construction, you go through the state building code drill. So I'm about wrapped up. Are there anything that you were hoping I would address that I did not?
A Hail Mary question.
Yeah.
With your experience across the state, how often do you run into eminent domain?
Very rarely. Usually it's power companies, power lines that will be using that. And they usually use it for easements, not so much property acquisition, but easement acquisition.
I just asked, my thesis was on it.
Oh, okay, cool.
I was fascinated by the good, bad, and ugly of some of those situations.
There's usually in Montana, there's been some discussion about the use of eminent domain for trail acquisition and either easements or property acquisition for trails. And that can get a little hairy. Not a lot of places do it just because my impression is that they don't want to get into the politics of fighting with private property rights stuff. It can also come up in some cities will set up like a tax increment financing district, which is a tool that mostly larger cities will use, but it's not specific to larger cities, but you set up a district and then capture the increment that gets reinvested into that district. So it's a complicated process. Does anyone have any experience with TIFs? So the way you do it, so let's say a place Ennis might look to do something would be maybe the corridor coming into town from on the north side, where you have a lot of growth. You basically set up the district. The tax rate is kind of set at what it is, or you measure what the tax rate is when you set up the district. And as it continues to grow, that's the increment. And that increment is captured and reinvested into that district. And that can be used for improvements, it can be used for public improvements. A lot of times it will get used for eminent domain, where a town can buy property and they can sell it to they can condemn it, buy it, and sell it to another private investor who would build something that the town feels would be a public benefit. So that's one place where eminent domain can be used. You can get in trouble for that. Billings has gotten in trouble for using their TIF districts to replace roofs on private businesses. Missoula uses, and Missoula will call anything blighted and use the TIF money for that. So that's something you have to be careful about setting up. Schools don't like it because it captures their increment as well. They don't get their money basically. So that's another thing you have to be careful about if the school district is counting on newly taxable value from lots being built on in growth areas. Setting up a TIF can capture money that would normally go to the school as well. We were talking a little bit during the break about impact fees, which is a different tool that can be used by a community to raise money off of development. If the town was looking at doing something like that, you have to, you hire an engineering firm basically to evaluate your facilities that you would want to use the impact fees for. So an example would be if you have roads, is always a good one. If you say where the streets and roads are being unduly burdened by increased development, and it's not sufficiently offset, the benefits we're getting from this development is not sufficiently offsetting the impacts on our roads. You can set up impact fees. You would have to measure where your systems are now or where they should be, because you cannot use impact fees to address an existing deficiency. But you can figure out where your road capacity needs to be, where it would be based on growth trends. Basically divide that by the projected growth, and that's the impact fee. So you can charge $500, $1,000 per development or per lot as part of a building in the community. In one of the places I work, in Irving County, the Red Lodge Fire District actually set up their own impact fees. And they charged, I think, $2,000 per lot at the time of septic installation, because it was in the county. So when you got your septic permit, you owe the fire district $2,000. And that's what they figured they needed to continue to meet demand for the area. They did that for about 10 years. You have to reevaluate it every so often. They did it for about 10 years and let it lapse for various reasons. But that's a tool that you have.
What about personal liability for
board
being on
members?
a board?
You do not have personal liability on a board. It's you have a immunity, basically. The city is the one that would have that liability. That's not to say that you won't get sued, because people will sue anyone and everyone they possibly can if they need to. And a lot of times that's what people, I mean, they'll name, and you'll see it on lawsuits, right? When someone sues a town, they'll name the mayor, the public works director, the town clerk, the town attorney, every town councilman, and it usually gets negotiated down from there. But as a board member, you do not have liability unless you act unlawfully. So if, let's say you're on a board that has, that collects fees. And planning boards do collect fees, and some planning boards do have, like the Hardin Planning Board has taxable authority, and they run their budget. They set their own budget independently of the city. And so if you had a board member that was embezzling that money, well, guess what? You don't have immunity. If you're taking bribes from developers, you're not going to have immunity. Yeah, but if you make if you're just acting in your capacity as a board member, you have immunity. Good question.
So we've talked about a handful of boards, but as far as like if you wanted to create a board in the past, we've had a zoning board that was just working on town zoning codes. I'm just curious, like, what are the steps a person has to go through?
Like a subcommittee, or
Ultimately a resort tax board, I guess.
oh, okay. He said.
Yeah.
Now, I am not super familiar with the way a resort tax would work. Do you have a resort tax now?
No.
Okay. But possibly set that up.
Yeah.
So usually boards are they're really prescriptive in statute. It'll tell you exactly what you need to do to set it up and how it's to be run. So if that's something you're looking at doing, I'd look it up in statute and see what it says to do. Another really good resource is the League of Cities and Towns, which Ennis is a member. They have 100% membership, and that's your insurance company and your lobbyist, and they'll you can give them a call and they'll walk you through things. Kelly Lynch is the executive director. She's an attorney and a planner, so she has a lot of experience in land use type stuff. So that's who, if you were looking at setting something up like that, that's who I would start with. Maybe have your town attorney, have James reach out to her. Sure. See what they come up with. And then there are, you can set up a district for almost anything. You can mention the tax increment financing district. You can also set up improvement districts. So if there's I know some communities have done this. If there's like a drainage problem in an area of town, you can set up a drainage district where you tax properties within that district to correct the drainage issue. Streetlights are commonly done through districts. Sidewalks can be done through districts. Even road maintenance can be done through districts. And sometimes that's a good tool if there is a very localized problem, or if there's a group of people in a small neighborhood that have a very specific ask. Usually it has, one of the areas I've dealt with it personally is streetlights. People, we need streetlights here, and I want them to look pretty, not just the big pole with the light fixture sticking out from it. And they'll have a very specific thing design they want, and fine, set up a district, and usually they get about halfway through it, and then they see the bill that Northwestern Energy is going to send them to put these lights up, and it falls apart.
No streetlights.
No streetlights.
Excellent information. I'm overwhelmed.
Well, we'll walk you through, Susie and I will walk you through the applications on a case. Like I said, you don't have to know everything. We don't expect you to know everything. It's just kind of throw a lot. There is a lot out there. And if there are questions, I guess, that are specific that we didn't really go over, let me know, and we can, or let Susie know, or let Greg know, and put it on a planning board agenda for discussion. You're not really limited on what you can talk about. I wouldn't recommend the planning board get into talking about regulating immigration, but there's, if you wanted to talk about economic development strategies, that's stuff you can do, and we can look into and come up with ideas. If you wanted to look into street beautification programs, that's something that you can look into. If you wanted to look at how to have a bow hunting season for town deer, that's something we can look into. There's nothing that really says you cannot, as a board, look into it. And your recommendation, you make recommendations.
So is that a formal or informal discussion?
Everything's formal, or you will have
Yep.
to recuse yourself. And full disclosure, please.
Yeah, put it up. Someone can refer to an agenda. If it gets on there, you can discuss it. If it's a one person thing and everyone says, no, not into that, it can die.
I have a question, actually, it's for all the planning board members. Did everyone get a town and Ennis email?
No, yeah.
No.
No, you should.
Like as of like today.
Well,
Just regular emails?
no. So everybody gave me a regular email, like whether it was at yahoo.com or gmail.com or whatever. So going forward,
It wasn't there.
we will all have a ennismontana.org email address for, sharing, getting meeting notices and that sort of thing. So if you didn't
So I
have
need to
one,
go check that. I have,
check.
my Gmail's a different world.
check.
And
How about you, Mark?
I don't know, I'll check. If not, I'll
Please do.
let you know.
Please do, because,
Um,
yeah,
We need some ginger.
John, I think, I know, I asked him before the meeting started, and I think he had said he had gotten to everybody. So check your regular email for that.
Will do.
And on that note, I talked about the ex parte type communication. It's, if you do have a public email address for that, that's the one you'll want to use for getting email and sending email related to the board.
But not replying at all.
Just, yeah, don't reply all, and you can,
We get a test later.
yeah, I'll put together the,
You don't have to confuse yourself.
and the reason for that is if something does go to a lawsuit and your communications get subpoenaed, you only want your town email getting subpoenaed. You don't want to give them your Gmail.
Because then all of your Gmail
Good luck with that,
can
Savannah.
be reviewed.
All of your email is then
That's right.
part of the public record. So you can have it, what I do is set it up to forward to like my Gmail. And then if I just needed to reply, I'd reply from the town email.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive to not respond back to those big group emails, but yeah, it's like.
I'm sure you guys get that on the commission training too.
Yeah,
Don't hit reply all.
right.
Right now.
Yeah.
How about cell phones?
As far as.
Oh, if you're, well, I guess,
So
if
text,
you're replying to, yeah,
text messages are written communication. And if you guys are sitting around the room texting each other during public debate and it's on something that you get sued over, your cell phones could get subpoenaed. So don't do that. Just, I guess, don't think that text messages are going to get around the public disclosure and public information laws. As far as, if someone wants to use their cell phone to record your meeting, someone from the public says, hey, can I record this? Or even if they don't ask permission, if they just hit record on their cell phone. And you'll get that from time to time, something controversial. You'll have someone walk in and hit record on their cell phone. I'm recording you right now. Generally, you just let them do it, would be my advice. If you do record your meetings anyway, you can say it's already being recorded and you can get it online, but you're welcome to record if you want. You can set parameters as far as stopping someone from walking from person to person and sticking their cell phone in your face. You can say, if you do want to record, or if you're media, or whatever, you can be in the back of the room, set up your camera, whatever. But I wouldn't lose too much sleep over someone wanting to record in a meeting. Because it ends up, if you try to shut them down, it just ends up looking bad.
Well, and it's legal now. These guys are all public officials. So.
Yeah.
text this.
Write it,
Because that's,
regret it, say it, forget it.
Yeah. And I will, if if I end up on an email chain with you guys and you are replying all, I will respond and say, cut it out. I did have a planning board member in another place argue with me one time. And she was an attorney, so she should have known better, but she would reply all, I don't like this application. I think we should do more about it. And I said, quit replying all. We can discuss this at the meeting. And she emailed me right back and said, well, I think this is fine because we're just discussing what we're going to discuss later anyway. Like, I don't care. I started copying the county attorney on those emails, and he was like, yeah, quit replying all, people. It's it might not be an issue. Honestly, I have never had a planning board decision that I've been involved with go to a court, but it could happen very easily, and you don't want to be answering those questions about why were you discussing this without the public present, because you'll lose on that ground alone. And it's just best to not have that question come up, is how much were all of the boards biased as they reviewed this.
So as long as you're not discussing, voicing an opinion, or discussing a topic or something like that nature, you wouldn't reply to all in that instance, but if I'm setting up a meeting, I can send out, if somebody has a question, right, about time, what time or clarification, I can still reply to all.
Yeah, I just had my,
Or would it be like, I have to send.
That's a lot of time.
I would send 6 separate emails.
no, you can, so all the board members can be on, if you're setting up, if you're setting up the
Like this.
agenda. Yeah, if you're setting up the agenda, you can do that on a group email. If someone doesn't know the time, and if you don't say the time, then maybe you can reply all in that situation. But if you don't know the time, it's just you, I just hit reply and what time. Basically, be very, very careful about hitting reply all. I mean, there's 99% of the time it's, okay, I'll be there, and not a big deal. But for that time where it's, yeah, I don't like this application, or I think we need to ask about the critical mule deer grazing habitat on this, then it's, then you get into issues.
So the mass text problem.
Yeah.
You have 1,000 emails in that hurry anyway.
Yeah. So it's just err on the side of caution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this is your email for us?
Yep. Yeah, I even got done.
There's no periods or anything?
Yeah, no periods.
Okay, got it.
It's a long email, so we'll get to.
Yeah, the tasting comes along, so.
It's coming up really fast, but I think the devil's in the details.
No.
Interior finish work, right? So
Yep.
that's good. That'll be
150 miles.
the outside. It's the inside.
That's not bad. This is not bad. It's that.
It's-
I drive 300 miles.
It's just so much more to go inside the house.
Whoa.
We'll see. Done work at a rate.
Stuck
Stuck.
Maybe see you later.
Yeah, that's
Basically cool.
13 miles out
I'm
of
used to
Get that, nice. He passes the
That's
quiz.
a neat place.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Great, I'll go look at that email, thank you.
Yeah.
Of course, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Yes.
Great to see you.
Dave,
Dave.
your name?
Jerry.
Jerry. Great. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question on the Madison water?
Can we log out of this thing? We can't, right? We don't have
Yeah.
to log out.
And you have quorum.